What I do is inconsequential. Why I do what I do is I get to shorten people's journeys every day. What I love about our hospitality industry is that it's our mission to make people feel cared for while on their journeys. Together, we'll explore what hospitality means in the built environment, in business, and in our daily lives. I'm Dan Ryan, and this is Defining Hospitality. Today's guest is an expert in hospitality development and planning. He's dedicated to adapting and accommodating current corporate values like social responsibility. He's described as a solid leader, exceptional relationship builder, and a remarkable technical subject matter expert. He's a senior vice president at Cumming Corporation. Ladies and gentlemen, Nicky Unkles.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
It's good to have you here. I'm so glad we're doing this in person because my Scottish is not very good.
I will try and speak slowly and clearly.
So there's a lot of subjects I want to cover with you, but first, I just wanted to ask, just for those of you who don't know, you open hotels, right? You're conducting the symphony of all the consultants, the construction, managing all the budgets, mostly in the luxury side, but you're really getting all these things to come together on a postage stamp at some point in the future, on time, on budget, in the luxury space. So in juggling all that and juggling all those chainsaws, right, and to make all that happen, all these really important milestones, how do you define hospitality on the way towards what you're trying to accomplish?
So the definition of hospitality is the friendly reception and treatment of guests or strangers. To be genuine means to be authentic and sincere. These terms seem easy enough to understand, but the actual practice of genuine hospitality takes consideration and anticipation of your customers' needs. It's real, it's authentic, it's caring, it's compassionate, and above all, it's welcoming. It doesn't matter if it's the CEO of a Fortune 500 or the intern. True hospitality is an emotional connection with the guest. And all guests are guests.
So in keeping with that, and you're trying to establish that connection. So I know in speaking with you earlier, like buildings are just buildings. It's all the things that happen within it, right? And you're responsible for making those buildings come to life. When you think about that, how do you balance all those things while still trying to drive a project to open on time so that the owners that you're working with are happy and they feel that same way when it opens? How do you manage all the stakeholders?
So it's ultimately all comes down to a process, and we need to delineate that process very early on. And we also need to manage expectations head on and early on in that process. And if that process is not maintained or there's a deviation from that process, things start to come undone relatively quickly. So my job is ultimately keeping everyone in their lane, allowing owners and decision makers to make informed decisions. And those informed decisions would be what would the schedule or budget impact be of making a small change. That small change to them may seem insignificant, but it may have a detrimental impact on the schedule.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, it's really like listening to everyone, keeping everyone informed, but really staying in your lane. And I know that, we all think that we've seen every possible scenario, but when we're doing a new project, whether it's furniture or building the whole building, we still see things that we've never seen before, right? We're still surprised. So can you give an example of one of those times where you had a big surprise that was unexpected and kind of how you navigated all those stakeholders while also getting, driving to what your ultimate goal is and the thesis of the project, but also making sure that everyone is heard and accountable?
There was one particular project, rather significant project that I will not mention. And we were well into construction, and the owner decided that he was going to change the design of the property. And when I say change the design, it was to introduce an entirely new design team. So at that moment in time, as frightening as it was, the only way to best protect the client was to ensure that the program remained somewhat untouched and that the changes that were brought to the table were more tag finishes by way of ID and less layout changes. That said, all the materiality had already been purchased, and trying to undo that was close to impossible. So you're getting, 25 cents in the dollar credits for materiality you've already pre-purchased. So we were trying to best encourage, and I use encourage carefully here, we tried to best encourage the design team and the owner to harness those materials we'd already purchased. And ultimately there was back and forth, and there was a compromise like there is in most things in life.
And it opened.
It opened
to great fanfare.
It opened a year late and massively over budget. We had a tsunami of change orders that we had to best navigate, and that was a real challenge because it was myself and one other cost manager against an army of engineers who were looking for ways of sliding paper across the table to say, you owe us this amount of money. And we had to not only verify the validity of those change orders, but really tear them apart and dig into the unit pricing, the rates, the materiality, and try and best protect the owner as we could. I mean, ultimately, we saved significant amounts of money, but there was still a huge budget bust as a result of that change, which was...
Well, it wasn't you that changed the design as everything was going, right? So you just, at that point, you're dealt a hand and you have to adapt and get it done.
All we could do at that moment in time was mitigate the overall risk and exposure.
Great. So Cumming, okay, so there's this next area, it kind of dovetails into a couple different things, but obviously we just went through a pandemic, right? And as being in the storm as a supplier, it was really about hanging on. Like, how do we hang on and do this? And there were a lot of people that hung on. There were a lot of people that didn't. And then there were the few companies that really took it as an opportunity to grow. And I really think that you guys took this as an opportunity of growth through acquisition and growth. I think you started before you carried on through the pandemic. How, as a company, going through all of that, did you guys communicate with each other and maintain that culture of abundance and growth?
We were very fortunate in that construction ultimately was an essential requirement, and it allowed us to continue. I mean, we slowed down. I can only speak to my hospitality projects, but we slowed down for a couple of days, and we were back at it. It was permits were changed. We were railroading through all the projects as essential works, and it was really about not necessarily staffing the projects. The construction itself was somewhat unchallenging. It was in the months that followed the initial shutdown, the materiality shortages became a huge challenge. And we saw the unforeseen escalation in both materiality and labor. It was a very challenging time. We did get through that. Ultimately, a lot of the budgets had to be compromised, and there was value engineering introduced to offset those escalations. And towards the end of projects where we met what I thought was the single biggest challenge was the shipping. Most FF&E, those vendors are coming out of, Vietnam, China. A lot of the vendors, will say they're in Canada, but ultimately the materials themselves are fabricated in far off distant lands. And we had to work hand in hand with the procurement agents to best navigate those troubled waters. And it was massively challenging. And it was, hand to hand combat daily to get those containers to a US port.
Yeah. And then, but also I got the feeling, and I also saw that you guys continued to grow through then, right?
Apologies, yes. So we actually grew, 25% year on year through COVID.
And was that organic or acquisition or both?
It was a combination. I mean, the majority of it was ultimately acquisition, and where others stumbled and floundered, we were in a fortunate position to be strong. And Derek and the rest of the team saw it as a real opportunity to grow, and we doubled down on the acquisitions and grew the business quite significantly over the past 3 years.
Wow. I mean, it's pretty amazing because there are companies that did grow, but most companies were just hanging on. So how did you guys, I guess, what was the strategy? Who said, you know what, it's time to acquire, it's time to go? And then I guess you just had a lot of dry powder in there?
There was no magic sauce. There was no secret formula. We adapted to suit, and, we were adapting continually. And we evolved all the way through COVID, and we continually evolve to this day. We're very fortunate in that hospitality is a small sector in Cumming's overall portfolio. We're very well diversified with aviation, transport, infrastructure, education. So we're fortunate that if one market sector was hit, other market sectors flourished. That said, for hospitality, we were very fortunate in that we predominantly are focused in luxury and ultra luxury hospitality, which saw phenomenal growth through COVID.
Yeah.
It was the select service and extended stay properties that got decimated. They're making a strong comeback now, but I mean, let's face it, they were decimated. But those ultra luxury properties excelled. I mean, you look at Aman Giri in Utah with Canyon Equity. I mean, those guys were sold out years in advance with the offering they had, the very unique offering they had. So ultra luxury, we were very fortunate. That was one of our core focuses of hospitality.
So that's a good point, because I hear that you're well diversified. I see it, but as I'm hearing you say that. So I guess a two-part question. One is, how do the learnings that you learned from working in ultra luxury or luxury and ultra luxury hospitality, how do the learnings that you gain on projects apply to the other channels like aviation, commercial, you name it? Is there any kind of learning or way that, I know you said processes, it's all about process earlier. Is there anything that you guys have learned or distilled from hospitality, distilled whiskey, scotch, there we go. But is there does that apply to all your other channels, number one? And then number two, and how? And number two, how do you define and stay as a leader in luxury and ultra luxury based on all those learnings and findings? Like, what keeps you in that sandbox?
So beyond being the one-trick pony in hospitality, my team genuinely loves what we do. My interns, my senior project managers, directors, vice presidents, they genuinely love what they do. Sometimes they're moved on to other sectors and they call me and they're like, Nicky, I'm bored. I want to get back into hospitality. We love it. It's exciting. It's fun. You can relate to it immediately. And there's no bigger kick than going back to past properties that you've lost bags of blood, sweat, and tears on over years, and you're actually now seeing them operate successfully. There's no bigger kick out of that. And I take my family back to properties I've previously worked on, and I love to be there. Because we love what we do, it's easier when you do what you love, and we have a very strong connection with the luxury and ultra luxury market, and owners and developers, like to work with us. They know the attributes we bring. We don't need to sell ourselves. They know the value that we can immediately add, and we like to get involved in these projects early on in the process. That's where we can best mitigate overall risk and exposure. And sometimes owners and developers bring us into the process later in the day when they're already 9 months pregnant, and we're holding their hand, taking them into the maternity ward.
Or you're already on it, and then they change everything in the middle. Okay, great. So, and a couple of marquee projects that just having just done a little research and just speaking to you, but Faena down in Miami and Public in New York.
Yep.
So as far as completing those, and I know like Faena in particular had some crazy artwork and just so many other things going on down there.
Fabulous stuff.
I mean, just I can't even imagine how you move it from one place to the other and get it all installed. But what are some lessons that you learned on those more recent projects, opening those from, and did it change your approach at all, or were your processes already instilled and unchanging from a perspective of project management?
Yeah, again, the process is the process. You've got to have a strong playbook that you default to. Both Faena and Public New York are very close to my heart. Faena was the first project I delivered in Miami, and Public was the first project I delivered in New York. I work with both brands to this day, and we're still at Public in New York, continually evolving and developing their program. And I'm fortunate enough to be helping Faena deliver their New York property.
And then, when is that opening?
I'm not sure if I'm allowed to share that, but the target was towards the end of 24, but I think it's probably going to push into Q1 25.
Okay. You can tell me and then kill me.
Yeah.
Okay. If you were to compare or contrast yourself to non-luxury or ultra-luxury, how does that white glove project management and process, is it different from just a regular project to a luxury or ultra-luxury project?
Yes, it's dramatically different.
And how?
So owners probably wouldn't necessarily stomach or have the appetite to pay the fee associated with having us deliver days in at exit 5 and 95. Ultimately, that's a very generic rollout, and it differs. It's a completely different universe to a luxury or an ultra luxury, for that matter, product, which is completely unique, and every program element of that property is completely unique, whether it's the theatre and the stage, or if it's the bars and the restaurants, the F&B, the back of house, the guest rooms, the presidential suite, the roof terrace, it's the spa, the pools. These program elements, and no one hotel is similar to another. I mean, you're starting ground zero every single time.
And then, is there anything? Okay, so another unique thing that I see when I look at you guys and see, there's you, Derek, and Gavin, who are like all Scottish. How did you guys meet? And then what is that Scottish thing going on?
The Scottish Mafia.
The Scottish Mafia. What is that?
Well, I mean, ultimately, Finlay Cumming is the genesis of the entire Scottish Mafia, right? So Finlay founded Cumming in '96 out of Irvine, California. Derek and I were both at Glasgow Caledonian University. He had a very clear roadmap into what he was doing, and he graduated and moved straight out to California and was probably Finlay's fourth employee. I was a little bit behind in that Derek saw what I had done in Miami with Faena, and he'd taken a leave of absence to go and work with Starwood Capital on the acquisition side of things, where he obviously grew a deep relationship with Gavin, who was heading up development for Barry. So I think Finlay had suggested to Derek that he'd completed his masters in mergers or acquisitions and come back to Cumming. And he did. And thankfully, he called me after completing Faena and suggested I come and help spearhead and grow New York. I don't think he was as convincing to Gavin, who went off with Peter to form Lair. But thankfully, a couple of years later, Lair was a very natural acquisition for Cumming, in that we were very much the scrappy dogs in New York, whereby Peter was very well established, pedigree, project manager. So for us to truly be recognised as, true heavyweight project managers, Lair was an easy target, and thankfully Peter came into the family, and I thoroughly enjoyed the years I worked with Peter and learned a tremendous amount.
Awesome. And then, so I didn't realize that it goes that far back. Okay. So when you think about, actually, earlier you said that you prefer to come into a luxury or ultra luxury project at a very early stage, because then you can add the most value. And then how are you, on those projects where you come in at a very early stage, if you could share an example, what kind of value do you guys add? Is it as far as assembling the whole team?
Because
setting
it's
up
before that.
even before. Okay, so walk us through what an early stage relationship looks like and what the value drive from that is.
So when we're fortunate enough to be asked to the table, in that instance, typically the client has a vision in mind, and we're ultimately trying to help them land that vision on paper. And that would start with a super high level charrette, where we would identify what the outline program's going to be. And to do that, we would typically have a go-to of who we think would be a very strong master planner, because a lot of these sites can be, spread over, hundreds of acres. So we need a master planner, whether that's an architectural master planner or a landscape master planner, and we work with both. And we have our preferred teams that we like to work with, and we would sit down over a 2-day event, better, fuller understand the vision of the client, and literally start mapping it out on paper, A0 paper with color pens, what the hotel program's going to be, the size, the volume, the program elements, the landscape, the roads, the infrastructure. And when we kind of spit that out, what we think the program's going to be, we can start pulling together some super high level ROM budgets. And more often than not, that ROM budget is not received very well, and we go back and start pulling back in the program. But that's where ultimately a project lives or dies, is that first couple of days sitting down with a master planner and trying to land what's the baseline program, what's the baseline budget, and then does it even pencil?
Yeah, and then from the times that you're brought on in that early stage, I mean, you must do look backs to say, okay, this was like the pie in the sky. We came up with these numbers. Now we showed it. I think they weren't too happy with what the numbers look like. Like, you shoot for the stars, then it's like, okay, well, this is what you guys want. Now let's see how we can come up with something that's more reasonable. When you're done with the project, how often do you look back and like, I mean, you must do it on every one, just compare, and how do you rate yourselves?
More than once. We've sat down and we've been through the trying to land the baseline program and that baseline budget, and the clients had massive sticker shock and said, we need to pull back the program. Or sometimes they've said, you're completely off target, and we've decided to part ways and go in our own direction, and later find out that their, $70, $100 million budget, whatever it is actually the $200 million we told them it was going to be 3 years later. And, there's not much we can do at that point but say, we told you so. But, more often than not, the number we give is the right number, and program needs to be pulled back.
Okay.
Because it's not going to be that luxury, ultra luxury property by value engineering it, right?
Right.
This just value engineering an Aman resort. It happens, but you cannot do anything that would have any ability to impact the overall guest experience whatsoever.
Totally. So that's really what's driving, is that guest experience.
100%. Listen, a guest arrives and they see the pretty things, the exterior finishes, and they've really got no idea what's going on behind the walls. So, value engineering, if it comes to that, has to be carefully thought through, in that those guest experiences are not impacted. You do not want to be changing out Violetta beautiful marble finishes in the spa for a porcelain tile, because it's no longer a 5-star or an ultra luxury product. It's just every other generic hotel at that point.
And then again, going back to that one trick pony metaphor, you've been doing this for over 20 years, correct? In the hospitality space. How have you, Nicky, evolved over that 25 years? And I'm asking from a way, like, we get a lot of younger people looking or listening or watching these podcasts and thinking about all these great careers into hospitality design, development. Like, how has your career evolved? Like, could you see yourself here right now from when you were first starting? And any words of advice for other people who may want to get into project management or as a representative of ownership groups?
I'm pretty tenacious. I'm pretty stubborn. And my wife regularly tells me I'm tenacious. And she says I'm stubborn too. But my advice would be, people give up too easy. People just don't have the stomach for it. And it's like, if you're going to start something, see it through and finish it, right? Because it's all an experience, and an experience is only good, right? It can be a bad experience, but it's still experience. An experience is good. So my advice and recommendation to my interns, and we have a small army of interns, is look, you might not enjoy this moment in time in the project, but stick it through, because giving up and moving from one job to another, it really doesn't look good in a resume. I mean, I go through resumes daily, and a resume to me is very quick to read because I've flicked through it and it's 18 months, 12 months, 7 months. I've no interest in it whatsoever, because clearly they've never started a project and seen it all the way through fruition to handing it over. And someone that has had the benefit of living and breathing from the initial visionary programming, budgeting, through the design phase, through the procurement, through the awards, through construction, and more importantly, through that turnover and closeout of a project, that's invaluable, absolutely invaluable. So if someone has that, the stars is the limit for them.
So you're looking for gluttons for punishment.
Yep,
tenacious
absolutely.
gluttons for punishment.
I like tenacious people.
Okay, let's say you find them, but how do you teach them to be even more?
Having the ability to genuinely care and take ownership is where many people struggle, and that struggle can come with training, or sometimes it's just natural to people. You know, when it comes to operations and operational training, training's more than just turning down a bed, setting a table, or checking someone in. You know, true hospitality training is all encompassing, whereby, you know, you take ownership of what's not my job. You know, the little piece of litter in the hotel lobby, the empty coffee cup on a table, a helping hand to an elderly guest, an ear to listen, a careful eye, a gentle hand. You know, that's hospitality, and that's what really makes the difference.
I love that. It's really, and if you think about why you're doing all those extra things, even though it's not like part of your job description. It's because you have the empathy for that other person, that guest that's walking through, to experience it, right?
You put so much into these projects, you want them to be nothing short of an acclaimed success. And if you see something that's out of place, you can't not help yourself but to step in. And you know, that's a problem. I mean, I regularly go to properties, and my wife Selena will get frustrated because I'm picking out the flaws, and she's like, "Why don't you switch off and enjoy where you are?" But you know, unfortunately, it's a trait that will follow me for the rest of my days.
Yeah. I guess earlier in my career, in the early 2000s, there was a gentleman named Stan Bromley who was, did you ever know him?
I did not.
Oh, he was like a GM, but also like in the higher management structure of Four Seasons. He was in San Francisco. He was in DC, then moved to San Francisco. And I would have coffee with him sometimes. My mother-in-law was actually friends with him, or still is friends with him. But he would always walk around with like a little, like an index card, and notice all these things. He would, and walking through the hotel with him, he'd pick stuff up. But the stuff that he couldn't do right then and there, he'd make a note. And let's say there were fingerprints on a door or just other things that were out of place. He wouldn't go to the person that was responsible for that, because that would have been a missed opportunity for training and growth for the manager.
Yeah.
He would collect all these things and then sit down and be like, okay, I noticed this. Like, what can you do about it? So in a way, if he went directly to that person, he's taking an opportunity for learning and growth for that manager. And then that manager, it's an opportunity for him or her to have the person that was responsible for it to learn and grow from that as well. And again, that's training, that's culture, that's just, it has so much to do with what hospitality is. Oh, actually, going back to you and that tenacity, how's that served you over your 25 years?
It's not dissimilar to the advice I give. I'm very fortunate to have worked on some wonderful projects. I've also worked on some not so wonderful projects, and you know, some of those are going on to this day. But I think it served me well. It's important to be able to emphasize and share with fellow younger team members and new clients and owners that you have the stomach for it. And you're not going to give up at the first hurdle, or you're not going to give up at the 29th hurdle. You're going to see it through. You're going to be there with them by their side, and you will have fallouts along the way, but you know, dust yourself off, pick yourself up, and carry on. You know, there's no one person is more important than the project.
Okay, so you've been doing this for 25 years. As you look at all the evolution of Cumming and where you are now and where you, Nicky, are right now, and what's exciting you most as you look ahead over the next handful of years?
COVID changed everything. It really did. People want more, and they're going to continue to push the boundaries of what that more is. There's talk, and I'm witnessing all-inclusive making a strong comeback, but you know, people want more. They want better experiences, and those experiences can be on property, they can be off property, but it's the world of hospitality is forever changed. People aren't going to accept substandard anymore. They want good finish. They want good service, and it's got to be consistent. It can't be, show up on a Sunday morning and it's different to what you experienced the day before. It's got to be consistent and it's got to be good.
So on the I love the word consistency because to me, I always hear this word authentic. Oh, be authentic, more authentic. But to me, what authenticity is just really being consistent on what you're delivering, right? So Nicky, as you look to the future of the projects that you have with clients that you're working with, or even ones that you're not working with, more aspirational clients that are out there, what is exciting you about what you're seeing in the future as it pertains to luxury and ultra luxury hospitality?
What excites me and what excites a lot of people is the unknown, right? People are going to continue to push the boundaries and challenge themselves and others. And, ultra luxury is a very unique experience. And, luxury is a massively overutilized word, which is why we've had to come up with, ultra luxury. And, in years from now, it's going to be ultra luxury. But ultra luxury is really being able to truly anticipate an emotional connection with the guest and second guessing what's going to excite them. And that experience, as I said earlier, could be on the property and it could be off the property, right? And there's one particular flag that I'm aware of that because of who they are, they have an ability to give guests an off-market experience in that if they were in Zion National Park, for example, they could literally drive in the back door, not see another tourist, and have a literally VIP gateway entrance to Zion National Park. And the problem with Zion isn't Zion. The problem with Zion is through COVID, it just became so popular that it's been detrimental to the experience of Zion now. There's just so many people. So for a particular flag to have the ability to provide that true VIP experience off property really does separate them from anybody else.
And that would be Aman Giri.
Aman Giri.
Aman Giri. I've never been there. I've always wanted to go. Have you stayed there?
I've been on property a number of times, but I've never stayed there. Canyon own the local Hyatt in Page, which is where I reside when I'm on property.
And how far is that drive from Page to?
It's 20 minutes.
Oh, because whenever I see those photos of Aman Giri, it looks like it's on Mars.
It's the most unique and surreal landscape you'll ever experience.
And were you involved in that from the very beginning?
I was not.
Oh,
no,
you were not involved
I
in that?
I was not, no. I have a good working relationship with Canyon, and we're now working with them on the Aman Giri private residences.
There
at Aman Giri.
Oh, and is it the same is it the same architect?
Yeah, Massa.
Oh, wow. And all that concrete forming.
They're all exposed concrete. And, it looks like it's very simple, but usually it's the most simple things are the most challenging.
Yeah.
And it's massively challenging. Because of its location, because of its design, because of 100 different things.
Yeah, just getting everything there, I can't even imagine. And then the execution, and it's so hard to find good people that can execute on that vision as well.
Consistently, right? So
especially there, where I don't know. Do you have to put up housing for people?
So yep, and ultimately that's why Canyon have the hotel in Page, because it was ultimately used for labour housing from the outset. And Page has grown as a town, tenfold. It's quite something how well recognised Page is. But yeah, it's all of the above. There's accommodations to be provided. People aren't expected to come and go. It's very challenging, and it's very cost prohibitive too.
So I want to go back to something you said about lead. Like I'm a lead accredited professional. I was like very hook, line, and sinker bought into it back in 2008 or nine.
Yep.
Plus, it was something to do after the financial crisis when there was not a lot of work going on. But I had time to like do a real deep dive into it, and I really appreciate everything that lead brought to the vernacular of what we're all doing, and it kind of helped push sustainability and like an action plan for what we can do in the built environment. However, I come from like the FF&E world, right? So oftentimes lead does not apply to that. And as much as I appreciate how lead moved the needle, if you look at a building, let's say it lasts 100 years. If it goes under 10,
building.
Right. Well, let's just say like you're building a new building, it's 100 years. I just like 100 because it's easy math. You might, if you're doing a renovation every 10 years, that's 10 renovations of FF&E that goes in and out, the supply chain, the materials, the impact. And I think that while LEED was a great start, it doesn't address all the things that go into it from a furniture, fixture, and equipment perspective. As you're dealing with companies like Six Senses or Starwood or One Hotels, because you've worked on all those, right? Yeah. Okay. So, and sustainability seems to be on the forefront with all of them. How do you kind of reconcile or select vendors or select materials that can last, but also think about what the renovation cycle would be like in the future? And you might not even be on the project.
So the FF&E design ultimately comes from the ID team, and sometimes the ID team are suggesting or tabling materials that we know from past experience are not fit for purpose. Like a Saint Laurent stone, for example, does not belong on a bar counter because it's going to get very quickly decimated with citrus, your limes and your lemons, and you'll end up with a tough guard over the top of it, which, doesn't look good. But we ultimately try and best opine where we can from past experience, which materials are good, bad, and different. But the reality is when you're working with luxury and ultra luxury properties, you get what you pay for. If you value engineer your FF&E, you get what you pay for, and you're going to be replacing case goods every 10 years, whereby if you buy the right case goods, there's no reason why they can't last 10, 20, 30, 40 years. The soft goods, the soft furnishings, 100%, they need to be replaced as and when, but it's being able to table past experience and what's worked and what's not worked. And we have, unfortunately, experience of what's not worked.
I've found on case goods, like that's kind of my bread and butter, but I found that the ownership groups that are willing to invest in not only good case goods, but also like solid surface tops, for instance, horizontal surfaces, it makes things last. They can last 20 years.
Yep.
And so when you're looking at like let's say you're on the edge of a budget plan, and then but the owners, it's a trophy property, they want this thing to last, and you're like, look, if you really want this to last, I think that's a really wise spend to do this. How do you navigate those conversations when it might put them over? Are you looking to take from somewhere else?
So unfortunately, it all comes down to capital expenditure, and the construction budget and the soft costs is one thing, and the future maintenance of the property is another budget that's passed on to operations. Mm-hmm. So that's not something that we regularly opine on.
Okay. You're just there conducting and making it all get done.
That can's kicked down the road for someone else.
Yeah. When you think about the planning and execution of a hotel development, let's say from that early stage where you're doing the master plan, you shoot for the stars, you tone it back, you keep progressing, and you execute on that vision. Your tenacity's kept you there for the whole time. You deliver this finished project. How do you think that finished project where you go from beginning to end, all the things are going right, how do you think that helps define the hospitality experience that a guest may experience? Or do they not experience it?
They have little to no idea what's happened to make that experience possible.
So they're just seeing the end result. That's like, it's kind of funny. It's like, it's almost as
I mean,
if,
why should they, right? They're paying top dollar to be there.
yeah,
They don't, why should they care, right? They want to walk in and just be, they don't necessarily want to be wowed. It's, if you're paying that money, it's an expectation.
yeah. And I on one hand, I also think it's similar to if signage or wayfinding is done really, really well, you don't notice it. You just wind up getting to where you're supposed to be.
So on that, and I keep defaulting back to Aman and Aman Giri in Utah, but when people talk about signage and more importantly, identity at the gateway to some of these sites, they have these grand ideas about monolith signs and hundreds of thousands of dollars more. When you look at Amman, it's literally a farm gate, an electrified farm gate on a 4x4 post with a small 12-inch sign that says Amman. And that's it. I mean, they're not expecting people to drive past and say, oh, there's Amman, let's go in. You're going there because you're going there. Mm-hmm. And sometimes less is more. And I'm a big fan of less is more.
Mm. How did you wind up getting into all of this? From Glasgow, Caledonia into project management. Is that something you studied from the beginning?
Yeah, I've always been in hospitality. So I did quantity surveying at Glasgow, Caledonian, and I did my placement year with a small private practice in Glasgow, Fitzsimons, there, I was thrown into the deep end, and I really, really enjoyed the experience. And one of their clients at the time was IHG, after I graduated, I went back and I worked closely with Fitzsimons and IHG, and we ended up touching 98 properties, and in 3 years, soft renovations, hard
throughout
renovations,
Europe,
extensions, just in the UK.
Oh, just in the UK.
And then I moved on and went to another firm and ended up packing my bags to go to the Caribbean in 2007, and kind of haven't looked back, and migrated north to Miami in 2016 and migrated north to Miami in 2012 and continued the migration north to New York in 2016. I'm here now.
And then if you think back to growing up in Scotland, when you're homesick or you want a little touch of Scotland, what's your go-to food that you really miss?
Unfortunately, most of the food choices in Scotland probably aren't the healthiest.
That's okay. What's your favorite?
I love all food. There's not much food I don't like. But Glasgow's well known for its curries. Tremendous. Some of the best curries in the world are from Glasgow. Chicken tikka masala was founded in Glasgow.
No way.
Yes.
Really?
Yes. Mother India. So I'm a big fan of Scottish cuisine, yeah. Chinese and Indian food, fish and chips, I'll have it all.
Scottish is everything.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to Glasgow, Caledonia University. How old were you when you finished?
Early 20s.
Early 20s. Okay. So the 48-year-old Nicky that I'm talking to sitting across from right now, if you were to magically appear in front of your early 20s self, what advice do you have for yourself?
I probably would have got out to the States sooner.
Really?
Yes. There's just so much opportunity here.
So just pack up your bags and go.
To my younger Nicky, yes.
And where would you have gone to?
Probably New York. Mm-hmm. There's just, it's not called the land of opportunity for nothing. There really is so much opportunity. And if you want something, just go and get it.
I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I feel like we don't hear that enough anymore.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. Welcome. I wish you came here earlier too.
Oh, yeah.
If people want to learn more about you or Cumming, how can they get in touch or learn more?
Yeah, reach out to me on LinkedIn if I think you're not an axe murderer. I'll get back to you. But yeah, LinkedIn gives me some sense of privacy. So yeah, please, anyone that's looking for work or advice, reach out, say hello. Anyone that's looking for a good project manager, I'll give Dan my cell number and you can pick up with him directly.
Yeah. Well, and then actually that reminds me, if there are other companies, because you're still on the acquisition path, correct?
I believe Derek and John are, yeah.
Okay. So if there's any companies that are looking to be acquired or grow through acquisition, you're welcoming those calls too?
I would have to direct that back to Derek and John.
Okay, we'll direct it back to them. Maybe I'll get them on one day and they can discuss it. Well, thank you for bringing me to your office. It's been so fantastic. I really appreciate your time. I know how busy you are opening up all these properties. So thank you, Nicky.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and then I also just want to thank all of our listeners. Without you and our growth every single week, we wouldn't be sitting here right now. So thank you. And if this has changed your idea of hospitality or how to deliver hospitality or luxury or ultra luxury hospitality, please pass it along. And thank you.